Welcome to The Green Fix, your sustainability, business, and technology podcast. We are your hosts, Loretta Gutierrez
and Dan Leverington. G'day, welcome back to The Green Fix. This week, we're joined by Abundium co-founder Dani Matthews to hear how the Australian subsidiaries of multinationals can leapfrog their global teams to become sustainability innovators. She introduces what she calls the trusted triangle, which is the critical alignment between the CEO, CFO, and Chief People Officer, and why sustainability must transition from a compliance burden to a core commercial driver. What we loved about this conversation is Dani's approach of treating people as value creators rather than line items, which she sees as being essential for any successful transformation. We know this will be one that you love, so buckle up and enjoy the ride. Dani, awesome to have you on the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, thanks, Dan and Loretta. It's a privilege to be here. I love what you're doing here, so thank you for this amazing work.
Can we start by you sharing with the listener what Abundium is and the genesis of the organization?
So Abundium, our vision really is better leaders for a better world. And we believe, if we can create a revolution of more abundant-minded leaders that don't just care about profit, but the triple bottom line with people and planet, they have such a sphere of influence, the communities they live. We just feel like that can really help create a better, more sustainable world. The name Abundium, which might be curious to those who haven't heard of us, the whole idea was we actually created the word by listening to our community members. We surveyed them and said, what does this community feel like or mean to you? And a few of them said, you're like a precious resource or a local home for global leaders, because our niche is, that global multinational. So we're a tribe for the ANZ and APAC C-suite teams. And the abundant bit is, let's actually be abundant and lead with love and abundance rather than fear and scarcity. So the types of leaders we attract really have that mind frame, and they help encourage each other to think big. So we're really a local home for global leaders. And our principles are really important to us. So we have 3. One is get real. Let's get to know the humans behind the titles and create a very low ego community. Get real also means practical insight. So your piece on actionable optimism, we want to get practical. Give forward. Let's actually give forward and be generous with our insights, and also help the social sector. So we work with over 100 of the world's leading companies, and they can all nominate a local not-for-profit who then get free access to our curriculum. So we're working with over 60 amazing not-for-profits, some of whom are working in the climate sustainability space. And then thirdly, which is my favorite, is go large. It costs the same to think small as think big. So let's actually think big, be bold, be optimistic, lead with hope. So we really are a global leadership community. We have leaders from all over the world, some who grew up here, others who have come from all different parts of the globe. And we really care about driving good growth in the region.
I love that. We're big fans of your work, everything that you've done over the last few years. And one thing that I've heard you speak about a fair bit in the past is this concept of leapfrogging. So I'd love for you to share with the listener, what is leapfrogging and what does it mean for Australian companies?
Thanks, Loretta. Well, it's not for those who do reformer pilates. They sometimes get you to do big frog, little frog, leapfrog, and it always makes me laugh. So it's not that type of leapfrogging. But what we mean by that is because we're an island far away from the rest of the world. And for our multinationals here, the mothership, thousands, hundreds of thousands of kilometers away. So there's a danger we could become laggards to the rest of the world. But we think actually it's an opportunity. We're in the forgotten time zone. Let's actually see that as freedom to explore and create. And there's an opportunity to not always ask for permission, beg for forgiveness and leapfrog. So we're trying to get our subsidiaries to be innovative. We call Australia the innovation nation. So how can we pilot, test and learn here and then leapfrog that innovation back to the rest of the world and not always be the ones who receive the innovation, needs to be a yes and, but that's what we mean by leapfrog. And I think it really relates to the sustainability agenda. Like we need to keep our energy up, we need to keep innovating, because if we feel like we're always laggards to Europe or other parts of the world, it's not very motivating.
How do you think this can relate to innovation within sustainability strategy for the organizations that are a part of your network?
Great question, Dan. And I might share a previous examples. When Nikki Sparshot was the ANZ country leader at Unilever, he's a great friend of Abundium. She piloted the ANZ region on a couple of things to really test this concept. So they became a B Corp in the ANZ entity, even though the mothership wasn't. And as you know, that's a very rigorous criteria, especially for a multinational in FMCG to achieve. And she also piloted the 4-day work week in New Zealand initially. So I think New Zealand's a great test nation, even more because it's a smaller population. So you could almost try it there first, come to ANZ. So I think that's an example where she took that bold leadership and then ended up becoming the global chief of transformation for Unilever because she had been bold and experimented here. So I think that's a great previous example of how this can actually come to life.
Yeah.
In terms of that leadership way of thinking, you use a term specifically, which is mind frames. And
That term actually came from my co-founder, Rich Hurst, because as you'll know, with all the neuroplasticity research, our minds aren't set. So we prefer the word mind frames because we're malleable and we can change our neurology. So that's where the term came from. And in terms of belief, I've been thinking a lot about this recently. And if we disbelieve in the net zero transition or our sustainability strategies, we probably will never achieve them. And belief doesn't necessarily guarantee you'll get there, but it's a lot higher chance you will than if you don't believe. And a high performance researcher I love, and I've had the privilege of going through his program, Andy Meikle from a company called Elkium. He's researched Nobel Prize winners, the late Nelson Mandela, amazing athletes. And one thing he's distilled from all these leading pioneers is that they believe when there's no proof. And I think that relates to this topic because we've never been there before. We haven't ever got to this 2030 vision. And if we don't believe we're going to get there, we never will. I'm a big believer in the law of attraction and where our thoughts go. And if we believe, we're open to possibilities and we'll embrace new technologies. Like there could be things that are going to be released in 2 years' time that can leapfrog us to get there. But if we disbelieve, it's a dangerous cycle. We do a lot of work with leadership teams on instilling this belief. And it can't be fake belief because you can try and get yourself to think something. I've really been thinking, how do we feel it in our nervous system, in our body? It's a whole capacity piece as leaders to develop so that we truly believe.
And I think that feeds quite nicely into something that you've said before, which is that a lot of ESG leaders are being set up to fail. How do you believe we can shift their roles from constant performance mode to including the learning and well-being that is so important to their ongoing success?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. We talk about the growth triangle at Abundium, which is this idea, as you said, performance, learning, and well-being. Because if we get stuck in performance, which I think we've been in danger of with the ESG professionals, it's not sustainable. I've met so many, and I know you have too, who have burnt out and their passion has been driven into compliance and reporting, and they've lost that initial energy that got them into the profession. If we want sustained performance, we have to make sure that they're getting opportunities to learn, to restore themselves, build their own sustainable practices and energy management. In COVID, we found that sustainability was in the top 3 priorities when we surveyed our members. I think people got time, they stopped, they saw the impact, and now it's sort of gone lower down the priority list. And there's a risk with that sustainability roles become more of a side desk role again, where it's not properly resourced. They have too many things that they have to achieve so that they're just chronically in performance. And as we know, you can just burn out that way.
yeah, absolutely. And with your experience working with multinationals, right? I wonder if there are some good examples of how multinationals can access global voices, talent mobility, learnings from overseas to help unlock not just sustainability implementation across the organization, but also commercial opportunities.
The reason why we love working with global multinationals because you have this rich, diverse talent environment. Leaders are leading across borders, across cultures. You can learn what people are doing in other subsidiaries and create communities of practice. A company that does that really well is Schneider Electric, who Time Magazine voted the world's most sustainable company. I've had the privilege of meeting some of their team members at COP28 in Dubai previously and in different parts of the globe. And they've got like an impact maker ideology and framework, and some of the principles I talked about leading with ambition and thinking big, they really embody. That's the great thing is if we don't just think inside our own building, let's think about what are other subsidiaries doing? How can we learn from what they're doing in Singapore for a pilot? And obviously there's got to be nuances to your local environment. But I just think, yeah, talent mobility, how can we actually get with a lot of the restructures that are happening, how can we maybe bring someone from another subsidiary here to inject energy and innovation? So I think it's a really exciting time for talent. Like I've heard our CEO say, there's more talent on the market at the moment than they've ever known. And how can we harness that and think a bit differently about it as well?
It's fascinating because I know you've been speaking to quite a few CFOs recently, and they clearly need those case studies. How are you seeing the dynamic between the CEO, the CFO, and the Chief People Officer in determining whether a sustainability strategy actually gains traction instead of remaining on the to-do list for years on end?
Thanks, Dan. Well, yes, we call that the trusted triangle, the relationship between the CEO, the Chief People Officer, and the CFO. And it's just such a engine of the business because if you can align, the people, the finances and the strategy together, which is where I believe sustainability strategy, should sit. It can't just be with the chief sustainability officer if you have one. It has to be a heart of the business strategy. I think it's just such a powerful engine. And we're finding, those trusted triangles that are aligned to this is where they're getting the most traction. Like DHL Supply Chain, one of our members, is just a core part of their 2030 vision. And the more that it's, talked about in the normal leadership meetings and it's on the agenda, it's not a side thing that's discussed in the water cooler moments. Like this is just a core part of doing business here as well. But the CFO, as you mentioned, really interesting persona in this. So we've recently launched a CFO forum, so a true peer network for CFOs. And as you know, a lot of them are now responsible for mandatory reporting. Some of our members are in the first tranche, some it will come later down the track. But for them, without the right framing, this can seem like a burden because it's another cost to their P&L. It's on top of their normal financial auditing. And there's a risk that we've heard from them that the cost and the time are being allocated to compliance rather than creativity. So I think it's really important we take CFOs on the journey and see this as a competitive advantage rather than a burden or a compliance piece.
It's really, really interesting to hear that. How do you see CFOs being supported in moving past this frustration of the reporting costs and the compliance focus to see sustainability as that commercial value driver?
Well, one of our masterclass previous speakers, Stephen Kotler, says frustration is the gateway to flow. So I actually think the frustration is a healthy tension because it's often in that frustration where we're challenging and we're trying to work out what this all means is that the breakthroughs come and then we get this beautiful state of flow, which I feel like is coming. And I think sustainability, if you look back over time, there's ebbs and flows. You have a real peak period, you lose a bit of momentum and you plateau. And then I feel like we're sort of been plateauing a bit, but then we're back on the rise. So I think for CFOs, case studies are great. If they can see how this could be a legacy for them, like if they're leaders in this space, what a great piece for their career. And to actually be leaders in this space and help it be a competitive advantage, because we know for young leaders, this is a really important topic on average. So a talent retraction strategy when they're looking to recruit, finance leaders into their team. So I think it's really reframing. And I'm optimistic that this frustration is going to lead to flow, but they need good role models. I think they need education, to actually go on, whether it's a Cambridge short course like we did Loreto. I think that would be really beneficial too.
It's really exciting to hear that it has been a part of the conversations that you've had through the CFO forum. You have this really unique perspective, very macro view of the business ecosystem. So I'd love to talk a little bit about multinationals in Australia and different approaches that different multinationals might have as they operate in the country. One interesting parallel could be where they are headquartered. In your experience, how does a European headquartered organization, for example, you mentioned DHL, would differ from a US headquartered organization, even in, when it comes to their appetite for those bold sustainability pilots in Australia? What have you seen?
It's a great question, Loretto. And as you say, we have the privilege of having lots of different global HQs. So we really do see trends. And I do have to say, on average, our European headquartered members have really been leading in this space and continue to inspire us. But to give your listeners a case study, as you mentioned, DHL Supply Chain. So they're a global logistics company headquartered in Germany, and their sustainability strategy is aligned with the Paris Agreement. And from a European HQ perspective, they've invested heavily in sustainable fuels for their vehicle fleets. So they're really delivering real measurable carbon reductions. And interesting for Australia, because as you know here, sustainable transport fuels aren't widely available. Yet DHL have decided to not rely on traditional carbon offsets here. Instead, it's using global carbon and insetting model, which I thought was quite innovative, where the emissions that they're achieving in Europe through their cleaner, more efficient fuels, they're pooled and then they're applied across their global network. So our local CEO we work with is very passionate in this space. His customers can reduce their supply chain emissions before the local infrastructure here catches up. So I thought that's a great example with, the European leading the way, how we can actually benefit here. And they're still in the early stages partnering with customers on the model. But I think, how can we use scale to drive real emissions? Because we know offsets are a bit of a band aid solution as well. And for us, we often say progress trumps perfection. There's a danger here. If we wait for perfection, it's never going to arrive. Nothing's perfect. So, how can we learn together, grow together, bring our customers on the journey? And I was inspired. I met their team at the COP28 event in Dubai. They had a separate innovation event where I saw some of their green fleet and met some of their local teams. And I just think that's the thing with global companies. Something that happens in one subsidiary can be paid forward to another, and we all can rise together rather than trying to compete in different subsidiaries. Better together is one of our sayings at Abundium as well.
I think the secondary or tertiary benefit of that is it's showing the local market what's possible. And there's so much power in that, in removing the need for innovation or creativity in every discipline. It's saying this is already being done, this has been launched, this is going ahead. The decision is not, do we create it out of thin air or not? The decision is, do we get involved or not? And they're vastly different decisions to be made.
Yeah, and I think it takes the pressure off, because sometimes, as executives, we talk a lot about the difference between functional leadership and enterprise leadership. So, you grow in your function, whether you're a sustainability lead, finance lead. But then when you get to that top job, often you've actually got a different role as an enterprise leader. You're holding the system. You've got to think and act differently, and you can have so many different pressures, sustainability reporting, cybersecurity concerns, these, geopolitical things, tariffs, these things are being thrown at our leaders every day. Sometimes to be like, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Let's receive help as much as we can give forward help. So I've been thinking with this belief model as well, how can we as leaders, we don't have to always have the answers. Let's receive some of that innovation from Europe or elsewhere. And then we've got more capacity to do other things. And let's lean on our superpowers rather than trying to be experts in all things.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of the younger generation and the premium that they're placing on sustainability strategy, how are you seeing the current tech restructuring that's happening globally, but also very much locally, and the abundance of talent now becoming available, having an impact on how companies approach ESG from a retention tool perspective?
Great question. And yes, we're hearing about the quiet restructure or the not so quiet restructure, depending on what company is being impacted. But yes, I spoke to a prominent tech CEO who's American HQ'd a couple of weeks ago, and she shared, yeah, there's more talent than ever. And I'm letting go people that I would have fought hard to hire a few years ago. So it's a really interesting environment. Where I am here at the moment in the Greenhouse Tech Hub, which you two know is a climate innovation hub in Sydney, there's, more and more startups. So some of this talent is going into smaller startups, scale ups, because this purpose is really important to them. And there's a risk that some global multinationals are going to not have this innovative talent in play. And then they'll end up having to acquire companies that they could have actually built internally if they had their own, ventures and innovation hubs. So it's a really interesting time. We're very sort of bold and ambitious in our thinking with our leaders is in tough times, you actually need to invest for growth because Gartner had some great winning in the turns research after the GFC. The companies that stopped investing in people, you look then at their future performance and of course it plateaus. Whereas the companies that, okay, we're going to stick in this, we're going to keep investing in our people, the positive projects, which often are the first things to go when times get tough, they actually outperformed their peers. And the research was quite incredible. So I think, my counsel is you obviously have to be smart, but if you can hold the line and really hold on to your best people and back your products and innovation in the long term, I think you'll continue to win.
Absolutely. And what a great reminder and of the importance of planning for the future. Downturns are followed by upturns. So, how important it is to plan for that as well.
Yeah, just to add, Loretto, on that, we had a great masterclass speaker recently, Zeynep Ton, who's written a great book called Good Jobs. And she's collaborated with, MIT. And she said that headcount freeze is the fastest way to kill transformation. But how often does that happen? We freeze people, we freeze costs, no more subscriptions, no more this. And that yet we're expecting a huge change transformation, and especially in the sustainability space it's just counterintuitive. And she says we need to stop seeing our people as a cost, but as value creators. And that mind frame is so different to seeing your people as a cost. My sustainability team, they're value creators. They're not a cost that I need to get rid of as soon as times are hard.
Absolutely. In the last few years, we've had some really difficult times in Australia quite recently with the recent bushfires in Victoria, but going back through past bushfire events, floods, and other large scale weather events. Have you seen that affect or impact the urgency and the nature of reporting from multinationals, particularly those you work with, would typically land on Group One?
Yeah, I think climate change is very visible here in Australia, as you alluded to, with the recent bushfires. Then the flash flooding in Victoria shortly afterwards. We have these extreme weather events here, which makes it very visible. And we know through our own clients that people are directly impacted who work for multinationals. It really connects to the hearts and minds of leaders when you visibly see that through your workforce. So I do think it has helped raise this on the agenda again, whether that's directly impacting on a reporting level we're yet to see. I was recently on a Tour de Cure fundraiser on the Great Ocean Road, and then you see that area impacted by the flash flooding. It really brings it closer to home. And, from a business point of view, insurance premiums are going sky high depending on what business you're on. From an economical point of view, it really makes us think how can we become more climate resilient? If we care for our people, we need to prioritize this. So I do think it makes it more front of mind. It's just then how do we keep it front of mind because something else comes up and it's easily forgotten. So I think our job is how do we keep the hope up when we focus on all the negative impacts? It can sort of be a bit dismotivating. Whereas if we focus on the hope and the potential, then it can change our frame of mind as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Danny, this has been so much fun. What would you like to be a key takeaway for our listener to take with them into their organization based on what you're seeing and this conversation?
Yeah, I think my key ask would be if this has dropped from your leadership agenda, let's put it back on the agenda and stay curious rather than critical of team members in this area. Assume noble intentions. Take that extra 5 minutes with your CFO to actually explain the impact of the reporting and why this matters. My takeaway would be let's stay curious a bit longer. Let's keep asking questions. Let's put this back on the agenda if it's slipped off. And let's share personal stories because I think it's through those personal stories we build that human connection as well.
I love that. Yeah, couldn't agree more. Dani, it's been such a fun conversation. What we love doing before wrapping up is to go through rapid fire round. What is one recommendation you could give to our listeners? It could be a thought provoking book, a podcast, an article.
Well, in addition to the Green Fix, which everyone's listening to already, I would add another podcast called Change Signals by Michael Bungay Stanier, who's one of the world's leading executive coaches. Had the privilege to recently interview him again through Abundium. And I think this sustainability journey, it's a change process. And anyone who's interested in change, this is a great resource. He's got so many great interviews. So Change Signals by Michael Bungay Stanier.
And who is someone who has inspired you that you think we should have on the podcast?
Good question. I think I could fill a whole season for you. But the one that comes to mind has to be Paul Polman, who I had the privilege to meet at COP28 in Dubai. And I'm sure your listeners know him well, former Unilever CEO. Net Positive is his book and movement. But I think Paul just brings this optimism and hope, which I love. And even just reading his latest dose of hope gave me encouragement. The green economy is second to the tech economy with some great research by Boston Consulting Group. So Paul would be somebody I'd love to hear on the podcast. And I can connect you as well.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
We love ending on a real positive note. So is there one piece of positive climate news that you could share with us?
I love that. To end on a dose of hope, I think that last year saw record investments in renewables and sustained corporate climate action amongst all the geopolitical things in the world. And the Boston Consulting report showed that the global green economy has surpassed 5 trillion in annual value and is expected to exceed 7 trillion by 2030. The fact that it's the second fastest growing sector in the world, outpaced by technology, is really exciting. And that definitely gives me hope.
Yeah, that's incredible. And then finally, we are handing you the Green Fix magic wand. How would you like to use it to change one thing in the world?
Big question. I think I would actually elevate more women in leadership, because I've also got a big passion for gender diversity. And I think that would have a knock-on effect on positive climate action. If we have a more gender equal world, we've got more perspectives at that senior table. And I'm part of some great women in climate groups. And I know there are just a great load of female leaders who care, whose voices aren't being heard. And I'm actually going to the UN in New York this International Women's Day month to be part of a conversation around justice for women and girls. I'd love to elevate more women and then more cross cultures.
Wonderful. And yeah, I couldn't agree more, Dani. So great use of the magic wand. Dani, it has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much. You have such a unique perspective on the business ecosystem, and it's really exciting to hear all of your insights. And it's also really exciting to see how you have managed to connect all of your business experience and turn it into actionable sustainability as well. So we love your work. Big fans. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Well, thanks, Loretto and Dan, for giving us our regular Green Fix. And I just love your work. We need more sharing of stories and leaders to keep us all motivated. So I really appreciate the work you're doing.